So our next presentation, and this is one where again, I'm going to give a little bit of a warning. We are talking about hate groups. So there will be some content on here which some people will find objectionable. So if you've been doing research and OSINT for a while, this probably isn't going to come as any surprise to you, but there are some new folks here, some folks new to OSINT. So just so you know, we are going to be discussing hate groups. Nico Dekens, Dutch OSINT guy on Twitter. I'm not even sure I need to say anything about who he is. I think everybody pretty much knows you at this point, Nico. But Nico is another instructor of the SANS OSINT course. He is previously with Dutch government, working in law enforcement for years. Has done instruction of OSINT to all sorts of groups and a lot of speaking. Again, if you want to know more about Nico, feel free to look him up. He'll love it. I'm going to let him go ahead and get started. Take over, Nico.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope everybody can see and hear me properly because I can't see myself and can't hear myself. And I want to hang out with Matt now after that fantastic talk and drink bourbon with him and have a lot of laughs. But besides that, let me see if I can take the controls here by clicking on something. Yeah, oh, that was too fast. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know computers. So we're going to talk about hate. I had so much fun coming up with the title because I like the phrase haters gonna hate, but enough of my bad jokes, my Dutch bad jokes. Let's talk a little bit about me. Well, I am Dutch OSINT guy. Well, actually, I'm Nico Dekens. I'm a former intelligence analyst at Dutch law enforcement. I'm one of the co-founders of OSINT Curious, and I do basically 24/7. Well, I sleep sometimes, but I do OSINT all the time. I consult, I train, I talk about it, I read about it. Everything in my life is surrounded by OSINT in essence. So that's briefly me. Now let's talk a little bit about this talk and a little bit of a warning, a little bit of heads up, because a lot of you are at home and maybe your children are watching or someone else is watching. This talk may contain some images or content that may be disturbing or offensive to some of you. So viewer discretion is strongly advised here. I try to blur out as much as possible of things that may be offending, and I try to be a non-political about things, but hey, this is OSINT, we do political stuff, we investigate stuff, we look at stuff. So I strongly believe we can handle this as adults, and we can also have discussions about this as adults. So please do not ramble. Please do not point fingers at anyone. This is all about OSINT and how we can put OSINT to practice with disturbing content. So let's talk a little bit about what is online hate. And I basically grabbed this directly from Wikipedia because I thought it was so spot on. So online hate speech is basically a type of speech that takes place online, because otherwise it wouldn't be online hate speech, with the purpose, and that's the important part, of attacking a person or a group based on either their religion, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, disability. Basically, haters gonna hate about something. So that's something that you should keep in mind, that the purpose, that's something that we as investigators are looking for, or at least trying to point out. So that's just the speech itself. So basically the messages. But on average, when we are doing open source intelligence investigations, we are looking at individuals, and most of these individuals are part of a group. So a hate group is a social group that advocates or practices hatred, hostility, or violence towards members of other groups that they dislike, in essence, or individuals. So I think that's good for that basic level setting for the rest of my slides that are upcoming in my talk, that you somewhat understand what I'm going to talk about. And before I continue to the next slide, I'm not going to show you all kinds of cool websites or tools. I'm going to talk about the process, because I think if you understand the process and if you know how to use your mind within open source intelligence, you will figure out ways to maybe, well, Matt talked about it, Matt Edmondson just now, saying, hey, you can set up all kinds of Python scripts, host them up in the cloud based on keywords, and then start tracking the hate that you are interested in from your open source intelligence perspective. So what we are going to do for this talk, we're going to use the intelligence cycle to take every step within that cycle to find online hate or hate groups. So it all starts with planning and direction. We need to know what to look for. The next step would be, let's collect the information. And once we collect the information, we need to process and exploit the information to give it somewhat of meaning, or maybe do some refining of the data. Then we're going to analyze and produce basically our end results, which basically end up with some dissemination. So in the upcoming slides, I will walk you through each of these steps. And everywhere where you see it light up green, this is where we are now, basically on that crumb path. So for planning and direction, when we look at hate groups, my personal advice would be, if you're looking for hate or hate groups, try to come up with planning and direction based on the who, what, where, how, and why. So when we talk about these W's and 1H, you need to come up basically with your research questions. So for who, you may want to think of who do they hate? Do they hate individuals? Do they hate government? Do they hate groups? Do they hate a subject matter, for instance? So that's basically the who. So if you have given that some thought, you now have given your investigations a direction to pivot. The next question would then be, what do they hate? Do they hate someone? Do they hate, again, a subject? So it correlates somewhat to the how, but it's about the target, the victim, or the victim group. So where are they? That's important for you to understand, because if someone hates someone else, they need to target someone online. So you need to be able to be figuring out, where can I find them? And that immediately brings us to the where question. So where do they hate? Do they hate only locally from a global perspective? So for instance, I'm now in the Netherlands, maybe there's a group hating on people living in Amsterdam city. Can very well be. I know there are, because there's a soccer club called Feyenoord from Rotterdam, and they do not like people from Amsterdam, or vice versa. So that's that now gives you some sort of way to filter your information, or at least narrow down your scope within your planning and direction. We can also look, for instance, for where do they hate online? Do they do it on the open internet, or more on the dark web, or the deep web, or whatever? But where also correlates to the social media on average, or web pages, or videos, or even a closed group or a closed ecosystem. We recently saw a lot of new platforms emerge during, for instance, the United States elections, where people wanted to share their opinions, and with that came hate, for instance, because there were opposed groups, which makes sense. People, when they are in a group, they will have an opposite group. That's the way the world works. With that, we also need to look at the question, when. When are they hating? Are they hating, for instance, during elections only? Or are they hating only within certain time zones? Because that says something about where that group may be active. I've recently done some investigations where, based upon the posts, I could determine, hey, this group is most likely from that part of the world, because that's the time span when people are awake on that part of the world. So that basically helped me pivot into a more specific area of the world. So that's a little bit about the when. How? Well, what do they use? Do they use, for instance, a closed group to discuss their tactics, and then use maybe influencers on the internet, or people who are more out in the open, to bring out or broadcast that message, send out propaganda, spreading that narrative, or use a false persona to mimic to be someone else to still spread a certain narrative? So the how is sometimes a little bit harder to determine, but if you are able to pivot based upon those previous questions, you most likely will find the how. The why, No, the why question is the hardest question to answer within open source intelligence in general, because why do people hate? You will not always find that answer. So you can try and answer that question, but finding that evidence online is not always possible. So after we have basically gave our investigation some direction and we planned out what we're going to do, so we formulated those 5 W's, 1 H's. Now our next step is, how will we collect the data? What do we need? So it means that we need to think about, to keep ourselves, maybe our mission or maybe our client protected. So operation security, OPSEC, that's something that we should now think about. As well as, for instance, when we look at these TTPs, tactics, tools, and procedures, we need to think about, so what are we going to do? Are we going to make sock puppets and set up accounts on various platforms to keep tabs on the group? Or do we need to scrape information like Matt Edmondson just talked about and look at things over time? So with that, we need to think about what tools are we going to use to collect the data and what tools are we going to use to protect ourselves, our machines, and our mission. So with that, we need to set up processes and procedures to structurally, methodologically grab the information that we are looking for. So that's really important step before we actually fire up our machine, our laptop or computer to actually collect the information. This entire step, we are still not doing open source intelligence. Well, we are doing open source intelligence, but we are not gathering information. That's a common mistake people make. They will immediately fire up their computer without thoroughly thinking through their attack vectors. So next up, it's basically very simple when it comes to hate. If you know the target, you will find a hater. Because if you pick a group or a subject in this case, and you use that target, quote unquote, the victim group, and you use those keywords from that group, for instance, let's pick the Los Angeles Lakers as a victim group. You now know that word. You know Los Angeles Lakers. If you combine that with negative words, so the hate words, the swear words, well, basically things that Matt also covered just now in his talk, we will be able to find at least the people who are openly sharing hate or hate speech about a certain group or subject matter. So with that, we now find the haters. Pretty easy. There's no rocket science in there. So often these haters will hide in plain sight. So if we find their victims, we can now look, for instance, when we look at this example, this is a rally where people on YouTube were filmed spreading their opinions about LGBTI groups. If you look at the video, you now find haters or hate groups. You find individuals in there, as well as when you look at the comments underneath those videos, you will see people who are either against or for this narrative. We will also find people that are sharing links to their platforms that they are trying to find, or user accounts that we may want to pivot into, or profile pictures that we may want to use and pivot. We can also look for that URL from that YouTube video and see if that has been shared elsewhere on the internet. That helps us find maybe closed or more closed environments on the internet where these haters, quote unquote, are active. And that helps us investigate this subject matter. So again, really, haters 9 out of 10 times hide in plain sight because they want to be heard. They want the world to know that they are against something. So that's what they are sharing out in the open. So now we know basically what we are looking for. We've found some potential hate or haters based upon our goals and scope. Now what? Well, the next step would be the collection part. So we need to collect information. So where do we look? Well, we look for pictures. We look for videos. We look for profile pages on various or numerous platforms that are out there. We look for web pages that are related based upon keywords we formulated, because we know now our target group, the victims, and based upon their correlating keywords or words that that group is about, combined with those negative keywords, we may be able to find profile pages, web pages, videos, and pictures. And of course, all these things do exist on social media, because that's where people communicate with each other, or at least share narratives or opinions, or share certain propaganda, in essence, hate. So again, where do we look? We look on the internet, but we look at as targeted as possible using combinations of keywords. And in essence, we look with a broad scope, we collect the data, we exhaust our resources, and we pivot, and then we go to the next step. So when we go to that next step, we look, for instance, at these pictures and videos. And within these videos, we look for details. Here's an example coming from the Atomwaffen division, which was a group, well, it was well widespread in the news, Nazi group with a very strong opinion about stuff. Well, when we look at this picture, we can now see symbols. We can see specific logos. We can see uniforms in a certain way. We can even see, well, not all of them, we can see people, their faces. And within open source intelligence, we now have additional steps we can take to find new information. We can reverse image search the logo. We can reverse image search the gentleman in the middle, his picture, and maybe find out more. Maybe if someone just said, hey, this is the Atomwaffen division, we can just look in several search engines. So not only Google, there's more search engines than Google, and find information about that group. So we look for symbols, logos, sometimes tattoos that may tell something. We look at the location itself. Well, this location does not necessarily lend itself to do some geolocating, but sometimes we see temporal or local specific information that helps us pivot into narrowing down where this picture was taken. Do not underestimate, especially when it's videos, that the audio that you can hear can help you. Sometimes you will hear people calling themselves with their names or their nicknames or monikers, or you can hear an airplane flying by, which you may be able to correlate with a certain airplane flying over that region in time with air traffic monitoring tools. So there are a lot of ways we can use audio to give meaning to the footage that we found about a certain hate video, or that a hate group or hater is spreading online on the internet. So pictures and videos, really powerful. And with the internet becoming more and more of a multimedia platform, so no static plain text, these are very rich environments for us to leverage information from and find information and give more meaning about the hate or hate group within our investigations. So let's take a small step to how you could, for instance, label pictures and videos. Here I have an example of a rally in the UK, where some people supposedly from Antifa, because we still do not know, and that's something that I think it's important to know when you do open source intelligence, even though when you see people holding up certain logos or banners, that does not immediately imply that they are part of that group. We can only name out what we see. Those are facts. We cannot immediately say, hey, all these people are part of the group called Antifa, for instance. But what we can do is point out what we see. So what we can do, we can now see in that green square, we see a specific flag. And if you reverse image search that flag, you will find out that that's known to be the Antifa flag. And if you do a little bit more research on Antifa as a group, you could, for instance, see that that black flag is also very commonly being used by people who support that movement. Same counts for those red flags we see now in these purple squares. So these are all labels, which I like to call unique identifying labels, that help us understand what this group is about and help us find additional keywords that will help you or aid you to pivot into more specific details about a group or find additional information. Well, let's click a little bit further in the orange squares. I'm a little bit colorblind, so if the colors are off, sorry for that, but you get the idea. The orange squares, we can see the feminist anti-fascism flag. And that by itself, again, now tells us something. Hey, We know about Antifa now. We know about the feminist anti-fascism flag. Maybe we can now say there are two groups at that rally that share the same thoughts or the same opinions. Well, we can also look at the back where we can see in the red square now the purple pinkish flags that says Plan C. My immediate reaction was, I never heard about Plan C. Let me search engines or social media, people talking about Plan C. I want to know what Plan C is about. And that gives me an additional pivot point to give more meaning and in fact, making intelligence, actionable intelligence, where people can make decisions upon. In the front, you will see a group of people all dressed in black. Well, if you study a little bit about, for instance, this group, you know that Black Bloc is something that's very heavily related to the far left group. So not saying that it is Black Bloc, but it gives us a hunch on, hey, this may potentially be this. We need to find additional information, or maybe we have corroborating information that confirms or denies what we are seeing in this picture. So that's what OSINT is about. We look for details, we name out those details, and we find, we exhaust our resources to find answers to our questions that may help us understand what this rally or this picture was about and who was involved with that. So this may lead us, for instance, to profile pages. And well, a big shout out here to Sin Windy, because he made some great resources that help you to understand the attack vector or the attack service for OSINT investigation based on numerous platforms. I just picked one. This example is from Gap, a social media platform where on average, a little bit more right-orientated people spend their time, but as well, I've found left people and well, let's say neutral people on there also, but it's known to be a little bit more right-wing orientated, but that's not the message. The message is here that you have a great attack service where to look on a platform, where to find information about that individual or that profile on that platform that you need to understand what the role is of that individual within that specific hate speech or hate group. So we look for the profile pictures. With those pictures, sometimes we will see, again, unique identifying labels. We will see those taglines or logos from the group they support, as well as in their bio descriptions. You will see often, well, when I was investigating outlaw motorcycle gangs, they all had a tagline saying AFFA, Angels Forever, Forever Angels, and ACAB, all cops are beautiful. No, but you get the idea. That's something that now correlates to that group, that ties them together. And with that now, I've found keywords that I can use in search engine, social media to pivot and find maybe additional members based upon what I found on someone's profile page. And with that, we also look within those posts. And within those posts, we look for who do they reply to. And we look for hierarchy kind of comments. So if someone is always saying yes to someone, or someone is always giving orders, or vice versa, comments, likes, shares, that help us understand what that group is about, or to find additional places where that group is active. And with that, we look for links. You will see that groups maybe are on the more vast majority or well-known social media platforms, let's say Facebook or Twitter, but they will go, well, they will go all out on more closed environments where they feel safe, but they want to learn new people in, new recruits in. So they will share their links, their URLs on normal internet, and maybe lure them into more obscure places of the internet. And of course, always last step, map out those friends or followers, see how that network and the dynamic of networks cross-platform works. Who will always consistently follow someone else? So with that, you can keep track of someone if someone deletes their account, or their account gets deleted, for instance, for violating the terms of service or something like that. So hate websites, a little bit harder to find on average, because most hate and hate groups on average, in my opinion, are on social media nowadays. They don't have their own dedicated web pages, but we can pick them out fairly easy, because normally hate groups or hate websites will capitalize on paranoia, the uses of scriptural references, racialism, especially pseudoscience and intellectualism will help them to justify their own narrative. So they will make it look like if there were white papers or academic research about a certain narrative that they dislike. So for instance, we will see far left find pseudoscience or intellectualism papers against far right, or vice versa, or anti-LGBT groups. We will find information about those things. So it's really important to look for those things, which can help you point out, hey, maybe this is not a neutral page. This is a pretty biased page. And with that, you may be able now to find a hate group or a certain hate narrative. Also, in my experience, when it comes to hate or hate groups, you will see non-common top-level domains being used, because they know a .com or whatever will more easily get those pages deleted. So they will have more obscure offshore top-level domains. So that's something that could be a tell. And again, a unique identifying label that you can use within your investigations. So keywords. That's my golden rule for finding hate or hate speech. So we will look for hate-specific keywords. We will look for adversary-related words. Like Matt said, you will need to look for swear or negative words correlated with the subject matter that you are interested in, or the group that you are interested in. Keep in mind, if you find the victim group and you combine that with negative or swear words, you may be able to find the haters, because haters will hate. Also, when we listen to the audio, that may generate us keywords again. Also important when you look at, for instance, this tweet on your top page where someone says, hey, join us on Gap. So if you combine a certain keyword, in this case, Adolf Hitler, and then Gap and maybe join, you may be able to find places where people are trying to invite like-minded people to accept their narrative, or talk about the narrative, or become friends, or lure in new recruits, or find other things. The other example is coming from a platform called minds.com, where you can literally see that someone is having very strong opinions about the LGBT community. But I found this information, and that's the message here, by making specific usage of keywords and combination of keywords within search engines and social media. So we've planned our information, we've collected the information, so we are now ready to process and exploit our information. Well, not exactly. 9 out of 10 times when you are processing and exploiting your information, you will come to the step where you say, hey, we are doing our analysis, we are ready for production, but we need to take a step back to the collection because we did not exhaust our resources. Based upon our information, I now have to do some additional steps. So again, where do I look? I again look for pictures, videos, profile pages, and web pages, keywords, social media, and maybe from the information that I've collected previously, now I can find new hashtags, new hate-specific keywords that enrich my research so far. So, John, am I out of time?
You've got some time to wrap up, but we need to wrap up quickly.
Okay, I'll be quick. So, analyzing the data, it's the hardest part. It means that we examine and analyze all the data. So, my key here is to come to a sound analysis that addresses your intelligence requirements, validate your sources and resources, corroborate your information that you found or maybe your customer already delivered to you, pivot based upon that. Keep your bias in mind, because when it comes to hate and hate speech, bias and logical fallacies are a fall pit, a huge fall pit. If you try and find the answers to the 5W1H, you will be successful to find hate. Can we click through? So last part was just, hey, we did it. We but always try to learn, because you took all these steps, you did some analysis and production, the dissemination took place. Now lessons are learned, and refine your tactics and tools and procedures. So basically refine your standard operating procedures. That's basically what I wanted to tell you all. I have one more tip. I talked about, can someone click my last slide through? Because I cannot click anymore. Yes, I wanted to share two URLs because I think operation security for hate groups is important. I've written a blog for those curious about OPSEC. Take a look at that. And when you look into hate groups, I think it's really important to keep in mind the vicarious trauma that you may run into or get by being exposed to all these horrors that the world has to offer. So again, I also wrote a blog about that that may give you some useful tips. That being said, thank you for your time. This was my talk. Sorry for the rushed last part, but I got a little bit enthusiastic here. Took a little bit more time.
Awesome. Thank you, Nico. Fantastic. I think you have a lot of folks in your hallway. Great job. I did want to point out that this is content that we'll be diving into some on our advanced OSINT course that we're writing for SANS right now. So
Yes,
look forward to that later this year, probably.
absolutely.
So thanks again.